Morning. Today we're going to wrap up this class we've been doing on soil of the soul at these case studies. Hope you guys have gotten something from this. We are going to start a new class next Sunday based on 1st and 2nd Thessalonians from the perspective of living in community. So if you're one of those straight A students that likes to read ahead, then you can read ahead. 1st, 2nd Thessalonians next Sunday. From the perspective of living in community, and I think it'll be good. I'm excited about it. So today we are going to wrap this up. We're on part 4 of this journey, and this is the best part because now lots of progress has been made, and we get to see and even maybe relate to some of our own experiences, what it's like when healing begins to happen, when we begin to, especially in the perspective of forgiveness, we begin to release things, okay? I want to touch on something really quick I don't want to spend a whole lot of time because I really want to get through this today because this is it. But I do want to touch on something that we talked about last week, and I'm sure you probably don't remember because of all of your festivities throughout the week. We're all coming off the sugar highs, right? And so this was based on Matthew chapter 6. Somebody read, if you will, Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. Yes, sir.
For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses.
Okay, so this is a verse that I hear sometimes being quoted in light of, forgiveness and forgiving. And I'm going to give you my perspective on this. Again, it's my perspective. I could be wrong, and that's okay. And you could be right, and that's fine. However, I think that there is a more helpful way, at least from me, when I look at this, than when someone says, well, if you don't forgive, then God won't forgive you. Because quite frankly, I don't find that helpful. And I find that when we use this passage that way, what we're doing is we're plucking it out of a larger context that causes us, I think, to kind of miss what's going on here. So when we say this, we're looking at this from a primary transactional perspective, and it's really easy to do that. It's a very legalistic way of approaching Scripture. But this passage is in a larger context of Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7, which is commonly referred to as the Sermon on the Mount, okay? It's beautiful masterpiece that is strung together like in Matthew's gospel. I absolutely love it. And this is found in the middle of that, okay? But when I just want to make mention of a few things here. Matthew talks about forgiveness, and he links it, right, to receiving God's mercy. And one of the things that we need to not forget when we look at this and we think of this, okay, is that this is an invitation to several things here. In the context, it is directly linked to, look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 48. Somebody read that. Okay. The word perfect there means complete, not perfection in the sense that we use it in our language, right? Complete, whole, the way it's designed to be. And so this is an invitation to become like who? right? Like Jesus, who was a perfect representation of who? Father, right? And so the way that I look at this is failing to engage in the process, because forgiveness is a process. It is a process. If it isn't, then you need to educate us on how you do it, because we hadn't figured it out yet, have we? To where it's just boom, yeah. It is a process, and I believe failing to engage in the process. In fact, it was Jesus who told Peter, how many times? Infinity, right? And beyond, right? Which it reflects what? That this is an ongoing process, right? Ongoing process. And so failing to engage in the process of forgiveness is failing to engage in the process that helps us become more and more like Christ, okay? That's how we miss the mark. That's missing the mark, okay? I believe this is more about family resemblance, okay, than anything else. Again, becoming like your father, right, as opposed to this transactional forgiveness. But I think to refuse forgiveness is to live out of alignment with Father's heart. That's the reality, right? So refusing to forgive, right, does a lot of things, right? Reflects a lot of things. And some of those, let's just quickly mention, doesn't becoming like Father, is it? No, it's not. It also keeps us entangled in whatever it is. Oftentimes, our failure to forgive is linked to us trying to protect ourselves. Okay? I know this sounds a bit woo-woo, but just roll. It is lived experience. Okay? And trying to protect ourselves can be an indicator or reflect a lack of trust in who? Okay? Now, does that mean that self-protection is wrong? No, we're designed this way. We're designed this way, right? So keep that in mind, right? Refusing to participate in the process of forgiveness is refusing to participate in God's way of being in this world. Okay? And the call to forgive, as I said, is an invitation to align our hearts with God's heart. Okay? And when we refuse to align our hearts with God's heart, grace remains more of a theory and not an embodied practice. Does that make sense? Okay? Does that make sense? So go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this one, to me, speaks more to the depth that we can find. Like you say, my beard doesn't look good today. Well, maybe I can forget that, but there's something that was a big sin, right? There's got to be a limit on that.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, and you're right, both and. I think correct on both, right? It has to do with it's everything that has anything to do with forgiveness. It's not just limited to the amounts of times. It is to it's the totality of the idea. It's what allows us to live from a place of forgiveness. Does that make sense? Okay? Where we're walking into the situation with a forgiving heart, right? Before we've been wronged, we're ready to forgive, right? Which means we're ready to hold it loosely, right? Whatever wrong might happen. Or we're ready to, it's a posture where we can handle whatever comes our way in a way that is Christ-like. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. So I think how we approach things, how we talk about things, because here's the deal. A lot of people, I think, are walking around fretting over the fact that they are struggling with forgiving other people, okay? And wondering, where does that leave them in God's eyes? Okay? And so I think it's helpful when we look at this and we talk about it from the perspective of this is about becoming more and more like Jesus. It's about becoming more like Jesus, okay? That's why Jesus says, come follow me. It is at the very heart of discipleship, okay? And here's the deal. When we fail to engage in the process of forgiveness, right, you might call that a sin. Like, that's a missing of the mark here, okay? You're missing, because remember, you're aiming for something, and by failing to engage in that process, and so then you can understand why it would be, a difficult thing. So, is that helpful? Does that make sense? Okay? Like, again, that's my perspective. You're going to see it but as I walk through this, as I walk with people who've struggled with this, as I live in the reality that we all struggle with when it comes to being hurt, being harmed, the things that we go through, the struggle with forgiving, of releasing, of letting go, you can't escape that. It's not helpful just to simply say, well, if you don't, then this won't happen. It's like, don't you think I know that? Don't you think that, you think I want to be this way, right? It is a process, okay? It is a process, okay? And remember, the Lord looks at what? The heart. The heart, okay? So, I've said enough about that. I want to move on to, but I want you to keep that in mind, okay? Because you're going to see this throughout Scripture. You're going to hear these things, no doubt. You've been taught these things. I think that it's helpful, at least for me, to see this from the perspective. This is an invitation to become more and more like Jesus, more and more like Father, okay? As opposed to, well, I've said enough. It's just helpful for me to see it that way, okay? You see it how you want to see it, but that's just helpful for me. I just wanted to share that with you. Okay, so part 4 here. This is where Jacob begins to be in a place where he's learning. It's active formation, right? In the moment, he's learning what it looks like to let some things go, okay, to engage this process, all right? Everybody? We're good? Oh, well, look at that. Okay. Part 4. Acts of reconciliation and freedom. Jacob attends a small family gathering where distant relatives make... Hey, have you guys been at any small or large family gatherings recently? His distant relatives make critical remarks about his past choices. At first, anger rises. The old pattern of defensiveness threatens to take over. But he pauses and recalls previous lessons from God about mercy and grace. What does that reflect right there? Let's pause. He recalls previous lessons from God about mercy and grace. What is that reflecting? What is that a reflection of? Okay, trying to have the mind of Christ. Go back to the parable of the sower. What's being planted? Seeds, right? This is a picture of seeds beginning, right, to take root. That's what this is a reflection of, okay? Plants that have started taking root. Jacob decides to act with compassion rather than resentment. Do you see what happened there? He did what? He decided. He chose. Okay, he chose. He listens. So here's that process. He listens, affirms what is true about the family, and chooses not to retaliate. I want to pause right quick. He affirms what is true about the family. This is something that is active. It's happening in the moment, okay? In the moment. Imagine Jesus at any one of those moments, okay? And how he approached things, how he dealt with things, how he navigated things, even if going to the cross, okay? What does it look like? What are we talking about here, affirming what is true about the family? Think about this situation. He's in this situation. People have said negative things about him. They brought up some things, stirring the pot. Some things are stirring up within him. But he pauses, and he goes through this process to help him gain control of his reaction. So he's going to respond, right? And in the process, part of that process is affirming what is true about his family. What does that look like? What does that mean? What are we talking about there? Anybody? Yeah. 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 You guys hear that? It's, in the moment, it's being able to hold the tension, okay? And how allowing two things to be true. Two things that seemingly would be contradictory. One is they said some things and it stirred up some stuff, right? And they hurt him. Like in that moment, is it okay to say, you know what, that hurt? Like, you failed me in this way or another, right? But is it also true to say what Scott said, as an example, that's Uncle so-and-so, and coming from his perspective, you could see maybe why, right? And now it's not really about me, and it could be about X, Y, and Z. Or it could be one of those things where it's, yeah, and you know what, some of what they're saying is actually true. And it hurts, but it is true. Or it could be something of the effect that, you know what, maybe there's no ill intention here. Okay. They're not setting out to beat me down, right, and push me out. They're still family, right? And they mean well. You catching? You tracking with me? Okay, go ahead. Right. Yeah. So in this scenario, right, you have, yes, I'm hurt, but then they're family. And choosing to not define your family by the very thing that you don't want to be defined by. Think about it. Like, he doesn't want to be, you got to be careful in these situations, because one of the things that would upset him, I could imagine, I created the story, so I can say yes. This is what's going on, is the fact that he doesn't want to be defined or identified by those criticisms. Yet at the same time, if we're not careful in how we handle that, we start defining other people by the fact that they criticize us. Okay? And we come up with our own criticism. You see? And what's happening when we do that? What's going on? Creating a cycle, right? And it's choosing to stop that cycle. It's choosing to not add to it, right? Hurtful words. The easiest thing to do is what? Come back at them, right? And what happens? Just creates a cycle. You've ever been in an argument and forgot why you're in the argument? Am I the only one? Okay. Well, I'm a really good arguer. All right. Somebody else had their hand up? You forgot. Okay. Yeah, right? That's another part. It's like sometimes you don't like what's happening or how you're feeling or what's going on here, but part of what's helpful is recognizing the role that I played in how maybe some of this is unfolded, right? Regardless of what it looks like, it is a process, right, where we learn to sit in that tension, okay, and deal with what's going on in the moment in a more Christ-like way.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that I struggle with is, well, let's be like Jesus. Well, every time someone brought an accusation against Jesus, it was wrong. But I'm Alvin, not Jesus. And so you can bring a lot of things against me, and I just have to go, yeah, sorry. And that's kind of sad
Yeah,
if you're out. But Jesus gives us a new identity, a new, I'm born again. And so I think one thing for me, when someone's bringing up the past or saying bad things about Alvin, I can focus on that identity or the new identity that I have in Christ, and that I'm still God's beloved. So you can say a lot of things, but I'm already forgiven.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. I think, let me riff on that just for a moment here. Jesus was who he was in moments where people were making accusations and maybe where he would need to forgive. He was the same guy there as in any other situation. So the same characteristics and qualities that are needed to navigate those situations that are tense, where forgiveness might be needed, right, are the same qualities and characteristics that are at the table when that's not the case, right? Does that make sense? Okay? So it's about a posture. It really is. Living from this place. Somebody, go ahead.
Paul had to embrace his past. Past cannot be changed. But someone said, well, many years ago, what Paul did was reframe things in the Word of God in his life, so that when people no longer understood what was going on, all they did was remember the past. He himself said it, that is in Christ. He had to focus, as Alan focus on what God is doing with us today.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't understand that, perhaps that's an opportunity for me and Brian just to demonstrate I'm not that person.
Yeah. And it's also, yeah, you're right. It's helpful. It's so hard to do in the moment, I know. That's why it takes practice. Most of this practice, when we get to a place where we're able to do this in the moment, oftentimes it was after the moment, right, that these things began to come up and we begin to ask ourselves these questions and look at these things, right? It takes practice to finally be in the moment and stop and say, okay, what do I need to learn from this situation, right? Or what is this teaching me? Or to be able to do the things that we're talking about, okay? But at some moment, right, you've got to get on the field and you've got to start playing. Like you get what I mean by this, right? You've got to start engaging in this process, whether it's in the moment or before or way after, okay? It's all about learning, getting to a place where it's a posture, you're embodying these things. Does that make sense? When you walk into the situation, right, you're equipped with the tools that you need to navigate the situation, okay?
On the other side of that is I need to learn about God's grace to allow that person to be who God has made them, and not put them in the little slot for my name. Now, does that mean that the bark and dog won't bark? Sometimes they will. So sometimes that person's going to act.
Yeah.
And that's what's really hard, is that once we're ready, we sign things in people's places off, and then, you're dead.
Too easily, right?
But God's grace for us, being faithful to God,
Yeah.
God, our Father, allows us the grace to grow. And He wants to see it. If I don't show it,
Yeah. Yeah. So we're getting to a place where he's, like in this moment, he's no longer reducing people. And that's what we do. We reduce people to the moment they hurt us. right? We reduce them to the moment they hurt us. And we tend to forget about the relationship prior to that, right? But when we stop and we remember those things, it's very helpful. It softens even, it has the power to soften even what's happening here, right? So it is possible to be in a moment and say, you know what, they failed me, they hurt me, they fill in a blank. But they are also not their failures. As much as I don't want to be defined or identified by whatever mistake it was that they're bringing up, I also don't want to do the same thing, right? And define them or identify them by that moment. Does that make sense? Is that making sense? Okay? Both can be true, right? So this is alignment with Father's way of seeing, right? Think about it. God does not deny our sin, does he? But he also doesn't identify us by our sin, does he? Okay? Doesn't deny it. But he also doesn't identify us by it. Okay? God, consistently names what is broken, doesn't he? Yeah. But at the same time, while affirming what is still good and true, right? Right? Think of any character, main character in the Bible, any of them. Any of them. That's what you're going to see. And part of what we did this year is going through, in some of our series, the people in Scripture and how God met them where they were. And these were by no means, and these they did not have it together, man. They did not have it together. The reason why Abraham's faith is so iconic is in light of who he was when God chose him, right? And the development and the process that he goes through, okay, in all of that. It's rather mind-blowing to me, okay? But just remember those things, okay? By affirming what is true about his family, Jacob is, I believe, practicing God's posture, okay? And becoming like father rather than reacting like the wounded child. Does that make sense? Okay? So, any thoughts, questions, confusions before we move on? Because I want to get through this. Nope? Okay. All right. Remember, forgiveness isn't just releasing others. It's learning to see people God's way. It's learning to see how God sees. Does that make sense? Okay? This is Sermon on the Mount formation in action. Okay? All right? All right. So, the result is subtle but profound. Jacob feels emotional lightness. It's the release of the heavy tension he carried for years. What might that be? What's going on there? Physically, what might be going on there? If you haven't figured it out, I don't like separating our feelings, what our bodies go through, from our spirituality, whatever. We compartmentalize things way too much. I look at things way more holistic. You can't escape that. What might be going on there? It's a lived experience. Go ahead. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For example, releasing resentment, okay? Releases the nervous system is at play here, right? And when we're in self-protection mode, that's a real thing. And your body knows what to do, right? To protect you. It's instinct. We can talk about it a lot of different ways. Fight or flight is probably the most common, right? Self-protection mode, right? The problem is we get stuck in those modes when we don't need to, okay? When we let go, release, then the nervous system can then do what? relax. And that's what Abby was referring to. Is that what you feel, okay? But that's oftentimes what we're pursuing when it comes to forgiveness. But remember what we talked about previously. There's a lot of work that happens. Oftentimes forgiveness precedes the feeling of release, the lightness, okay? Remember that, all right? Yeah, so the body no longer has to carry what the soul has entrusted it to, okay? Man, we could sit with that for a while. All right, so his relationships become more open, and he notices greater freedom in other areas of his life, including his marriage and friendships. What's going on there? His relationships become more open, and he notices greater freedom in other areas of his life. Yeah. 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 Anybody else? That's good. Anybody else? What's going on here? Okay. Okay. Anybody else? One of the things that comes to my mind is that we're not as good at compartmentalizing as we think we are. Maybe in our minds we are, but our bodies oftentimes, or other areas, don't follow suit, okay? And so when something happens, bet your bottom dollar, it's going to have an impact on other areas of your life, right? Which is why, again, I think I mentioned this before, some of the best advice I was given by an elder one time was that when you're confronted with people's reactions, oftentimes it has nothing to do with you, and it has something to do with something else that is going on in their life that they're wrestling with, that they're struggling with, okay? What affects us in one area affects us in other areas, okay? That's why we have phrases like, don't bring your work home. Did I make that up? Or that's a real thing, right? Don't bring your work home, right? Right? What happens? What's going on there? Right? You're letting out your frustrations on your spouse or your kids, or they're feeling the tension, or you get the point, right? What affects us in what happens to us in one area affects us in all the areas, okay? I say all the areas, I use that term loosely, but it will impact other areas, okay? And so then as was mentioned here, healing happens, right? If something good is happening over here, do you think that it's going to impact the other areas of your life? Yeah. Look, we've all lived that example. When you said yes to Jesus, did your life change at all? At least to some degree it did, right? Did it start impacting other areas of your life, right? And it continues to do that, right? Okay? All right. So, his relationships become more open. He notices greater freedom in other areas of his life, including his marriage and friendships. Forgiveness, once a theoretical idea, becomes a lived, repeatable practice, a choice he can embody in his mind, will, and his body, right? Remember, practicing forgiveness, this is important, is about formation, not emotion. Now, emotion is a part of it, right? Feelings are a part of it. They're indicators. They're helping us understand some things, okay? They're great indicators, horrible masters. I'm a big feeler, trust me. I know this by experience, okay? Horrible masters, you don't want to be controlled by them, all right? So let's look at this. We say that it goes from theory, and I'm real big on this. Like, I love theories. I love to hypothesize about lots of things, right? But we've got to take it from theory to practical, embody this. So let's look at how he's done this, okay? It's about formation, okay? Notice the steps he took. His mind was renewed. How? How was his mind renewed? What did he do in the situation? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, a little bit of self-awareness there, right? What does he do with the situation? Yeah, by reframing, right? What's going on there? He reframes the situation and then he reorients his perspective on things, right? His will becomes more aligned, right? How? He chose. What's the will? Remember that? This is why all those previous lessons that seemed disconnected, disjointed, that's why these are all important, okay? The will is what? What you want. Like, it is literally the only thing that you have complete and utter control and power over. Your will. It's what you want, right? It is what you want. That's why, and it resides where? In the heart, man. It's at the center, the core of who we are. Like, that's where it's at, okay? So he aligns his will. He chooses. So in other words, he doesn't want to feel that way or to respond that way or react that way, should we say. And so he chooses, right? He actually wants a better way. He wants, we would say, to be like Jesus in this moment, right? And it's not just about mimicking for mimicking sake. It's because there's actual freedom that you experience as you walk this way. Does that make sense? Like, that's what it's about, okay? So it's what he wanted, and then his body is trained to respond differently. How? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He took control and didn't allow his body, how he was feeling, right, to dictate how he responded. So there's a difference between reaction and response, okay? So yeah, he didn't allow his body to dictate the moment regardless of how he felt. How?
There's an opposite side here that I have to argue. And that is not to feel spiritually superior.
Yeah.
I am not spiritually superior to the horse stock. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
God is great. That's the thing that I'll say I have to remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the more we learn to forgive, the more we learn to love. The more we learn to love, the more we learn to forgive. Those things are inseparable, right? And remember, it all comes down to healing, right? It all comes down to healing. A couple of passages here. We're not going to get through these reflection questions. It's okay. A couple of passages here. Somebody read Luke chapter 6, verses 35 and 36. Do you see how this is practical? I mean, we've read this so many times, right? But do you see how that is actually practical? It's possible to love your enemies. Do you see that? Do you at least see a way by which that can come about? That's my question. Based on the things we've talked about. Scott? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's possible to love your enemies, especially when you look at it. For me, it's helpful to see how practical it is when I look at it through the lens of forgiveness. As a posture, as a way or a place from which you're living. Right? Okay?
That we were asked sometimes in the prisons, well, how can I be a Christian? They're just kind of a mealy-mouthed, noodle. And the guys some of the guys, they wouldn't do it. They didn't like the idea. So even, it doesn't make any difference where we are in life or in our social strata. Forgiveness does not mean I'm a doormat either.
Right.
Forgiveness, and I like what Alton said about this superpower, the kind that God is that it strengthens us to try to see what is real, and not just my story, their story, somebody else's story, but what's real. And now, how can I act with mercy and grace as from God's perspective, so that person becomes empowered to do and be what God wants.
Guys, hear all that? It's a perfect way to wrap this thing up, okay? I'm going to use a verse here in a moment to piggyback on that. But Colossians chapter 3, we're not trying to read through it, chapter 3, verses 12 through 14, where he mentions compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience and forgiveness as a clothing for life. When he talks about putting on, okay, it's the idea of sinking into a garment, okay? Everybody's got their favorite clothes they like to wear, comfortable stuff, like comfy clothes, no? I do, man. There's clothes, I'm just like, man, you put that on, it's like you're just getting hugged the whole time, right? That's the idea. Remember, you're sinking into these things. You're getting to the point to where you're getting comfortable, right? Remember, it's a sinking into. I like comfortable clothing, right? And the point I think I want to make here is that we can become comfortable with these things, okay? Even in situations that would otherwise be uncomfortable, okay? Does that make sense? One final verse here. Man, you could just sit with this for hours. At least I could. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 18 and 19. Paul says, God reconciled us to himself, giving us the ministry of reconciliation. Time out. I understand. But the Apostle Paul is probably talking about this from the special perspective of the apostles and the mission they were on. However, it doesn't take long to see how that's our mission as well. Right? We are in the business of redeeming, reconciling, reconciliation. And so I think that's helpful if we recognize that, and that ends up being our approach to things. Okay, we see that how this is a part of us partnering with God, right? And reconciling the world, if you will, like the part that we play. And a big part of that happens in those situations where forgiveness is needed, right? We bring that to the table. And oftentimes, we are the face of forgiveness for people who may have never experienced what it's like to be forgiven. Okay, that's why we talk about the 4 Gospels. It's actually 5, your life. I love that. I don't care how cliché it is. I absolutely love it because it is true. It is true. Our time is up. I hope this has been helpful for you guys, especially this approach. I like doing things this way. I like doing things differently. It's just fun. Experiment with it. And maybe we'll do it again. No? Yeah? Okay. Thank you, guys.